NJ.com and the Star Ledger welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Politti and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start chopping.
All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Rutgers Rant. Politti here, Fonseca, Lanny, the crew. Our year recap. It's the end of another year, fellas. Man, does time go by fast? That's what you're supposed to say. Do you agree? True or false? Is time going by fast?
I'd say true, because I turned 28 this year and I just had a friend turn 30 the other day, and every waking second I feel like I'm marching towards being ancient like you, Politti. So yes, time goes very, very fast.
28. Those were the days. Newspapers had a future. I could wake up in the morning without every bone on my body aching for no apparent reason. I remember 28. That was a good year.
How was the hairline at 28, Politti?
No, it was still bad. That didn't matter. I had hair though, but the hairline was receding fast. I gave up like at 30. I just that's when I quit. All right, that's not what you locked in. You didn't come into this podcast to hear about my hair. I mean, if you want to, we could do that for a while. It wouldn't really be a long show, but we have a couple things to talk about. We're going to talk. You do year in review. We've done this the last couple of years. We're going to talk about the entire year of Rutgers athletics. But before we do, there's one man who is not looking back in the past. His name is Gregory Schiano. Wow, how about this weekend? 10 recruits commit to the class of 2025. That is, from what I understand, an historic haul. Enough to get my attention. You know how, guys, I feel about trying to follow football recruiting under the best of circumstances in June. I'm certainly not dialed into that stuff, but I mean, I guess this certainly even exceeded, from what I understand, exceeded their expectations. Pat, I don't even have a minute to dive into this thing. I mean, what is your sense with the stars of this class, and what jumps out to you when you see what they managed to get this weekend?
So when I look at recruiting, I always try to find trends and similarities between the recruits and what brings them all together. And it's actually just looking at the 10 that committed this weekend, I really couldn't find like, oh, all these guys come from this state or all these guys are this position. It was kind of a diversified portfolio, in my opinion. You got kids from across the country. I think it was 7 different states for the 10 commits. The positions were pretty diversified, although there were 5 defensive linemen of the 10. But still, I just thought, when I looked at it as a whole, I thought it was very impressive because they were all pretty highly ranked 3 stars. And when I look at stars, I kind of try to compare to last year's class or the class before that and see, like, how does this player compare to that player? Because obviously it's just the numbers, kind of like a guess. It's tough. But I looked at the early enrollees from last year, the guys that impressed me in spring ball, and a lot of these guys had comparable evaluations to those players. You know, the KJ Duffs and Ben Blacks were high 80s, like 88, 89 player evaluations. So that's kind of where a lot of these guys fell. And I think that just speaks to the totality of how Greg is and Rutgers is recruiting, just bringing in a lot of guys that have upside, and like the more is merrier is their recruiting philosophy right now, I think.
Right. I mean, I just dig in. I go right to the list, of course. I don't look at the stars. I look for the paragraph that Todrick Hunt writes when it says, Rutgers beat out Penn State, Pitt, Syracuse, West Virginia, Wake Forest, Duke, Boston College, Maryland, Michigan State, and Minnesota. Then I'm like, all right, they got a good recruit. And that was Jordan Houston, the receiver from Queens. Then the other one from, I think it's just Nicky Wynn, the the tackle, picked Rutgers over 24 offers, including Wisconsin, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Michigan State, Vanderbilt, Pitt, blah, 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 blah. All pretty good list. Brian, I guess what's happening, and it seems like everything's moving up earlier in college football. This is just one more thing that's moving up earlier. There's talk of maybe getting a June signing date to replace the other early signing date. And that plays into Rutgers' favor, I think, because if you're going to visit New Jersey, this is a pretty good time. Like, I don't want to even do this podcast. I'd rather be outside. This is a pretty good time to do it. It's 80 degrees, sunny, go to the beach, go to the city, go to even time is tolerable on a nice night in June. It plays into their advantages.
Sure. The Jersey Shore is a great marketing tool, and that's where they brought a lot of these recruits. And I think when you're selling the vision for a program, it's a lot easier to do that when you're laying on the beach and it's gorgeous out and you can dive in the water and the vibes are good. So certainly, I think that helps. I think to your point, like this is just kind of the evolution of things. Now that the transfer portal dominates the postseason and December, which used to be like the critical time for closing stuff out, things are just moving faster and faster. This is the June before their senior season. Kids are already locking up their future. And it's part of it is because like you can't be guaranteed a spot in December. Kids want to make sure they have somewhere to go for their freshman season of college because if they don't lock it up now and they wait till December, unless you're the cream of the crop, a top 100 kid, that spot isn't going to be there by September. So you what used to be senior season visits during the season and then you decide afterwards, are now you take visits in your junior year, and by the end of that, you're locked up and deciding where to go. And Rutgers did a really good job of using that timeline to their advantage. There were a couple kids who had visits lined up that they canceled and decided to commit to Rutgers because Rutgers did a really good job of selling the program, and Greg Schiano is a good closer in that regard. So yeah, a positive weekend, good timing for everybody.
Right now, Rutgers has the 12th best recruiting class according to 24/7 for 2025, the fourth best in the Big Ten. That stuff is completely and utterly meaningless. I think looking at this, Pat, it looks like you're getting some more Greg Schiano type guys, big bodies, also some receivers, which I think has there been anything we've talked about more on the show the last 5 years than the sudden lack of NFL players at that position? Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's the kind of talent Greg needs.
Yeah, and these are all guys that have when you recruit a player, you have to recruit a certain size, athleticism. That's like you check the first box, right? But I think what Rutgers does really well is they bring in guys that are just like the program itself trending upwards. Like I think they have to at this point find guys that are gonna that are gonna exceed their offer list or exceed their reputation. And they're doing it earlier, which is great. So they're in earlier on recruits. But yeah, when you look at the guys they brought in this weekend, a lot of size, a lot of athleticism, and their receiver, like you talked about, you can never have enough receivers. You can never have enough defensive linemen. At least that's the Rutgers philosophy at this point. So
yeah,
I think that's important.
Yeah, and so to answer the question we got from a lot of people on the text service, yeah, I mean this Rutgers could be done recruiting this class in a couple of weeks. Like they have 2 more visits this month. I think what happens now, it's not the gun to your head. You got to commit now, but it is sort of like, hey, look, we only have so many spots. If you want one, speak up. I think that's going to be a clear priority. Yeah, I mean, you've got 18 recruits already for this class. That's what it's going to be, and that's a good thing. I think Greg Shannon would be tickled to have that part of this thing wrapped up, or as wrapped up as it can be, given you're right that he's got to turn the focus to the season, number one, and then number two, the portal. So good weekend for Greg Schiano in football. Brian, any other final thoughts on this before we move on?
Yeah, I think the volume of high school players they're still getting to commit is kind of a little bit against the trend. And a lot of people think the portal would be the priority for most programs going forward. But it seems very clear that Greg Schiano is embodying a developmental program mindset where you get a lot of these talented kids in high school. And in an ideal world, you still develop them over a few years and they become the foundation for your program. As we saw last year, the breakout year for football, a lot of the guys that were starting on the team were guys they brought in high school and developed them. They weren't a transfer all-star program. I think as far as being selective, I think now Rutgers can kind of fill in those last spots with guys they really want. Guys like John Forster, a running back from Jersey. Wide receiver, there's a kid, Michael Thomas III from New Jersey, who officially visited this weekend, and they're hoping is kind of the third wide receiver and probably the best of the bunch to join them. Jalen Matthew, the kid from Tom's Rivers, an offensive lineman who had a ton of great offers, and his stock is kind of not high as it used to be, but that's a name that Rutgers had over this weekend and could kind of fill in that role. So whereas now they've filled in a lot of the positions they need with guys they like, now they can be really selective and try to zero in on key targets. And if you don't get them, there's always the portal in December. And but most of the work for the class is done now, which for these coaches who spend hundreds of hours, scouting, recruiting, and going through this entire recruiting process, it must be a relief to kind of have most of that behind you. Though now some of the hard part is it's June. They don't sign until December. You got to kind of spend the next 6 months keeping these guys steady, holding on and making sure they end up signing the dotted line. And one last thing, one of the kids they got, Chris Viega from Bergen Catholic. Second straight year, Rutgers gets a kid from Bergen Catholic that they wanted, that had other offers, and they're really establishing that pipeline to that school, which for a long time wasn't really sending kids to Rutgers. They've developed their starting left guard, Brian Felter, not a kid that recruited, but a kid out of Bergen Catholic. Gotten Kosh Sanders, who could be a factor as a freshman, and now they got Chris Vega, an offensive lineman they really like. So if you can build a pipeline to Bergen Catholic, you're in a really good spot. And Greg Schiano's back to doing that, which I think is always a great sign when you can make a connection with those big North schools.
Rutgers on the list, or in the top 10 in the recruiting rankings: Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oklahoma, USC, LSU, top 5. I do have to laugh that Rutgers is 12th, but Syracuse is 11th. You know, that's like, even on a good weekend, that is chafing. Like, you couldn't have isn't it nice? You got your recruiting class set up exactly what you want. You're getting guys in. There's still some fan there sitting behind Syracuse. Grumble. All right. Let's move on to our year in review segment. Now, before we started the show, this is great. Brian was going through all of the seasons for all of the teams, and he says to us, there was only 3 teams from Rutgers this year that had a winning record in the Big Ten. And I said, don't tell us. Lanny and I are going to try to guess those 3 teams. And I've been sitting here for the first 15 minutes of the show, and I'm not sure I have a good guess, Pat. I think I've got one guess. I know you're going to get you. You got 2 or 3. You got 2 or 3 already. One of them's going to be wrestling, right? That's got to be one.
Well, hold on. Before you guys guess,
not wrestling. Of course not. Wrestling cannot.
Before you guys guess, there are 3 Big Ten winning records and 1 500 record. One team that
we're just doing the winning records. Okay.
You want to do the 500 record?
All right, we'll do that too. Okay, we'll try to guess. So it's not wrestling. Well, then I'm women's soccer. 1
thing. Correct.
Bang. Okay.
Women's soccer is, by the way, Rutgers has been in the Big Ten for 10 seasons. Yeah. Women's soccer is the only program that has had a winning Big Ten record in every year Rutgers has been in the Big Ten.
Really? Mike O'Neill in the house. Taking it, Mike O'Neill. Yes. One of the nicest men. Good coach. I'm going to talk to him today. In fact, I've got a 2 p.m. interview with Mike O'Neill about goaltender Casey Murphy. Chit-chat about some Olympics.
He's from Carter, by the way. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, I'm well aware. All right. So women's soccer, is that the best record in the Big Ten this year? The best winning percentage?
It is not.
It is not?
Yeah.
It is the least, I'll say this, it's the lowest winning percentage of the 3 teams. Yes.
Fascinating. All right, Patrick.
All right. The other 2, I'm going to say the highest was field hockey, since they were in the running for the league title.
Correct. Field hockey was 6-2. Nice, cool 75% winning percentage.
Okay, I should have gotten that one.
And the third is softball, which had a really nice season.
Pat banged it out of the park. Nailed it.
Softball, a winning record. How many Big Ten softball teams are we talking about here?
Well, this is the first season softball has had a winning record in the Big Ten. Breakout year for Kristen Butler and the ladies. They also had an All-American on their roster, so big year for the softball team. Yes, good job, Pat. Do you guys want to guess the 500 record?
The 500 record?
You guys said it before.
We did? What, wrestling? No.
Yes, wrestling went.
It was wrestling
in Big Ten meets this year.
Oh, okay, all right. So it wasn't that far off. Good. All right. 4 out of what is it? 23 teams.
I have 14 here. 14 teams
okay. Right,
that compete in a team-based thing that you can kind of match up with other Big Ten teams.
How many Rutgers teams made the NCAA tournament in their respective sports?
I am fairly certain only hockey and women's soccer. I couldn't do one off the top of my head, but those are the 2 that wrestling, that doesn't really count, right? Like they don't have a team.
They don't have a team.
Yeah, track. We won't count them either. We won't count crew. Okay. All right. So I don't know. Not the greatest. Cat's trying to look for a word there. Don't we have 2 out of looking at the Directors Cup standings? Rutgers is, I think, 58th before the spring sports are added in.
60th, I think.
60th. Okay, so that's better than last year, I guess.
It is. So 2 years ago, they had the breakout year program record.
Yeah,
I think 48th or 49th. Last year, they fell to one of the worst they've had in a long time. I believe in the hundreds.
Yep.
Now this year, they're probably going to land somewhere in the middle. They are going to be hurt by the spring because all of their spring sports struggled immensely. Aside from softball, baseball had a down year. The two lacrosse programs had a brutal year, and that's going to end up biting them. If I had to guess the final standings, they'll probably end up somewhere in the 70s to 80s, if I had to guess.
Yeah. So the best team, is it as simple as the Pinstripe Bowl? I mean, is that it? Is that the highlight of the Rutgers 23-24 season?
I don't think we would have thought so when it happened, but yes, to me, I can't think of anything else that could be the peak of the season than Rutgers football finally having a winning season, having a bowl win, and beating Miami. I don't think there's even a close second when I'm racking my brain.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I can't think of one either.
Well,
All
I
right, folks,
guess
that's our show for today. I'm kidding.
the only other one would be field hockey. They were, as Pat mentioned, right on the cusp of their first Big Ten regular season title. They just had to beat Northwestern at home, and in a back and forth game, it went to overtime, went to a penalty shootout, and Rutgers just could not come out on top, and they ended up second place in the league, which is good. But for a program like field hockey that won the Big Ten tournament and has been, along with women's soccer, probably the most consistent program in the department, it felt just like a disappointment to not be able to kind of get over that hump and break through. But that's what I would guess is the closest second. But
I would say the most thrilling moment, maybe it was not maybe not the best moment for Rutgers, but one of the most thrilling moments was that field hockey game with the controversial finish
Was
against
that this
Northwestern.
year?
That was this year. That was crazy. That was a wild moment. At the very least, like brought a lot of eyeballs to the sport.
Our best podcast ever. That's what that was. Okay. All right. Give me your MVP. Who is the MVP if they had to choose one athlete? Who would it be this year for Rutgers athletics? The face of Rutgers athletics. Go.
I think the obvious answer is probably Kyle Monangai, Pinstripe Bowl
Okay.
MVP, Big Ten's leading rusher. One thing that we didn't mention that I just remembered, Dylan Chauver won a Big Ten
That's what I
title.
was going to say.
I don't know if it had the same impact as when obviously National and Suriano won a national title, but that was one of the rare moments of Rutgers winning a Big Ten title. So you could argue that, but my money is on Kyle Monangai, just because, again, led the Big Ten in rushing, was arguably their best player last year, and it was the face of the breakthrough year for Rutgers football and the best team at Rutgers this season. I think most people would agree is Kyle Monangai.
Pat, you got another candidate?
I do. Morgan Smith was the softball player that you mentioned before, Brian. That was an All-American. I mean, the numbers were just absolutely insane all season long. And I thought, obviously, the way she lifted that program to a first winning season in the Big Ten, that's pretty special. And we're shortchanging the track and field team, which still has to compete this weekend at nationals. Maybe there's a chance for a national champion. We've talked about Chloe Timberg in the past, the pole vaulter. She's got a shot. Obviously, if you win a national title, you got to be probably in the running for the best athlete of the year.
I mean, how many times? This is a question. This is interesting. Neither one of you mentioned the Big Ten Player of the Year in baseball. How often has Rutgers had the Big Ten Player of the Year in anything? How many times has that been the case?
It's a great call. He's just unlucky that he had a breakout season on, maybe Steve Owen's worst team since his first season. Like, they just were not very good, and a lot of that was not his fault. But yeah, standout season on a bad team, is that as valuable as being great player on a great team? Or I don't think so.
JKG. That's getting my vote. Griffin Whitmer, I've read your press release. Just in case you're listening.
To wrap one of the questions we had on the text service about JKG, his MLB draft process or prospects, the MLB draft next month, I could totally see him being a top 5 round pick. That's probably where he's projected. Last season, Rutgers had a second round pick who was the highest draft pick in program history since Todd Frazier. I don't know if he'll be as high as Ryan Lasko, but certainly put in a really good season and has a chance of being, again, up there in the top 5 rounds and getting his MLB professional career off to a good start.
All right. So I put down 2 more categories to discuss. I had programs on the rise and biggest disappointment. Pat, I'll let you pick the programs on the rise, since I'm sure Brian will want to tell us what the biggest disappointment is.
Yeah. Programs on the rise. we talked about it on the last podcast with women's golf winning the NIT.
No, yes, it is
That was
the
a-
NIT
that was
of
a great
women's golf.
sleeper pick.
How did we not put that on our team of the year?
Right. There you go. There's one. The obvious pick is football, and most people will tend to
Yeah.
agree that things are
easy.
going well for that program. And then I think there's a lot of excitement about wrestling for next year's
Mhm.
team. I think that's a good one. And softball, you can't discredit what they did. So just a handful of teams there.
Biggest disappointment is obviously men's basketball team finishing 13th in the Big Ten, and it does speak to you got to put this in perspective. It does speak to the level of expectations that Steve Pikiell has created, that we can say that, because there was a time where 13th was exactly where they would always be picked to finish, and it does soften the blow knowing what's coming in next year. But that's pretty much the clear choice, I think.
I don't know about clear choice. I think it's a strong candidate. I think the down year was not a surprise. The depths of the down year was pretty much the surprise to finish 13th.
Right.
It was a pretty big step back from 4 straight years of a 500 or better record in the Big Ten. The other two candidates, I would say, is baseball. Their first losing record in 3 years. 2 years removed from being snubbed from the NCAA tournament. They did not even sniff it. So that's kind of the downward trajectory of that program the last couple of years is, I wouldn't say alarm worthy, but it is something to keep note of. And lacrosse, men's lacrosse, 3 years removed from a Final Four appearance in the NCAA tournament, they have back-to-back years with a 1-4 record in the Big Ten. We're non-competitive this year, and I think that's a disappointment for a program that you'd hope would follow a women's soccer-like trajectory of being always in contention in the Big Ten, and women's lacrosse too. Again, after having a breakout year 3 years ago, this is their second straight season with a losing record in the Big Ten. So I just think the stalling. Like, everyone felt very optimistic about the direction of a lot of programs, and a couple of them have stalled. Now there's the part where field hockey had a couple of great years, had one bad year last year, and they bounced back and had a great year this year. So there's always hope, but it just, you always want to see the trajectory of programs going up, and for a couple of these programs, it's going in the opposite direction, which obviously isn't great.
All right. Good job on the recap. Anything else? Any other categories? Coach of the year?
Greg Schiano.
Greg Schiano. All right, let's move on. Turn the page to 2025, 24, 24, 25, whatever you want to call it. But first, let's do some insider questions. Thank you for submitting them, as always, sticking with us here during the slow time. Oh, it wasn't slow recruiting-wise. Todd Hunt was banging out texts left and right. If you subscribe to us on the text service, you'll get the news as it's breaking. Bunch of recruiting questions. Adam wanted to know how much pressure does it put on the remaining potential football recruits with theoretically 6-7 spots left in the next class. Does it make the staff more selective with the remaining spots, keeping them only for a 4, or if the guy permits a 5-star? Adam, good question. I think it does certainly put pressure on them. I don't think it limits. I don't think Greg cares about the stars. Like, I don't think he's like, oh, we're not taking him. It's not a 5-star. Or at all. But I do think, yeah, it's now they're going to be pickier, right, Pat? I mean, this is not going to be something where you're like, you're going to just grab. Rutgers is not at the stage where they're just grabbing players.
Absolutely. I know one of the, I guess, black curtain type things that happens in college football is this concept of committable offers. And so some programs will just offer 100 kids, right? But they're not allowed to actually like, their commitment doesn't mean anything, really. It's my understanding that Rutgers only offers committable offers. And so if you get a Rutgers offer, that means you have a spot on the team anytime. But I think there is a certain level of, to a timeliness to this as well. So I think you get a little bit of both. Like, obviously there's a spot for them, but things are shrinking, so you got to be on top of it.
Another recruiting question. Why did so many recruits come in on the same day? Did Schiano give them an ultimatum, accept the scholarship offer before leaving campus because there's a good chance it won't be available in the coming months? I don't believe he did that. I talked to, made some phone calls on this, got the sense that they're just really happy with the way the players recruit the other recruits. I think they really feel good about when they get athletes on campus. They put them up with some of the best people, for speaking for what Rutgers is and what Rutgers stands for from a football standpoint are the other players in the program. And I think they really believe that. I think that's one of them. But I also think that this wasn't like a complete surprise. They brought in 21 for this visit, which was a big visit. But these are guys they've been working on it for a long time. I think that's the other part of it. It's not like this is a big surprise. First time on campus, we just met you. Hello, you're here. I think a lot of them just have had a good relationship, had a great weekend, and let's just get this over with. I think that was part of it too. Reading between the lines, Brian, those are my thoughts, but I don't get the sense there's any big Greg Schiano ultimatum stuff happening. That doesn't really sound like a good recruiting strategy.
So on the first part you mentioned, Greg has talked about this a couple times about tradition. This is what he believes tradition to be. It's not singing songs and doing Scarlet Walks. It's having your senior players that are in the program, bought into the culture, kind of welcoming in the new players and pitching the program to other prospective players. You have guys like Aaron Lewis who have been there for a long time and have lived this culture, are now able to convince other guys that Rutgers is a place that can come in as a highly rated kid and develop and all that good stuff. So I think this is an embodiment of what Greg Schiano hopes the program could become, kind of coming to fruition for one of the first times. Now, I don't think Greg Schiano or any of the coaches explicitly said, hey, if you leave this visit without committing, you don't have an offer anymore. But I would be hard-pressed to not think that it's not heavily implied that, hey, you should commit. Your spot might not be here in a week or two. If you take that visit to the other Big Ten school that's recruiting you, maybe we won't take your visit when you decide, or take your commitment when you decide to come back. I think these things are kind of just the way recruiting works. I don't think that's a blight on Greg Schiano or the program. I think every program does this because you're doing hard sells all the time, and that's just the nature of it. Recruiting is an ugly, ugly game. And I think you just got to do what you got to do to get kids to commit. So listen, I wasn't in on the meetings. I don't know what was said. I don't know how any of this works, right? But I would be very surprised if kind of vibes and friendship were the reason a lot of these kids committed. I think a lot of them are smart and have smart people around them that realize, hey, I should take this offer while it's there. If I want to go to Rutgers, I got to do it now. Let's pull the trigger and do it. And Rutgers obviously had a strategy that was very successful. And again, the hope now is that for the next 6 months, you can kind of hold on to the commitment. And you add more key guys with the remaining slots, which I think Chris has a good chance to do out of the weekend.
Excellent analysis. All right, moving on from recruiting. Question about the backup quarterback. This is what we've talked about a little bit. What is the feeling about the backup QB situation? Who will it be, and can they handle a snap in the game? I got shouted down when I suggested that AJ Surace would be playing as a true freshman, skipping over a Johnny Shepard. Can you guys make the case there? It will be a Johnny Shepard.
I get the sense that a Johnny Shepard, it should be a Johnny Shepard, in that AJ Surace just needs a year of development physically and mostly physically, but just to be amongst college athletes. I think he needs a year. Could he be the starter next year? I don't know. But
Right.
I think this year is very important for him just to grasp the speed of the game and things like that, and develop physically. So I think from that perspective, that's why I would lean a Johnny Shepard as the backup right now.
I think if you're Rutgers, you hope a Johnny Shepard becomes the clear-cut number 2 quarterback. That means that he developed a lot in his 1 year in college, and he's supposed to be more college ready to be the backup. I think no matter who is the backup, I think if you're Rutgers, you have to pray and pray every day that you never have to find the answer to that question, because the 2 guys behind Ethan Kaliakmanis are nowhere near as mature, college ready, and have college experience that he does. So no matter who it is, barring a stunning addition as a backup quarterback through the transfer portal, which I don't think any of us expect, this number 2 quarterback would be a downgrade from the starter. You got to hope that question is just never answered.
This is my favorite kind of Rutgers fan base question. With Gavin Wimsatt gone, can you recommend a new target to play him for this year's inevitable disappointments? Admittedly, he was deserving, but I'm not sure where to direct the collective wrath this time around. I love it. Who are we going to blame? Who are we going to blame if it falls apart? I know the answer to this question. I want to see the 2 of you know the answer to this question.
It's inevitably the offensive coordinator.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Yeah. Ding, 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 ding. It's got to be. Of course.
Right. Everything's kind of set around. Right? The defense has this level, and the offense just has to be better. There's no other way to put it. Like, if the offense makes a steady improvement, this team has basically everything there. So Yeah, it's definitely Shiraka.
The fans were they're already tired of Kirk Shiraka last year, unfairly, I think. And a lot of examples. I mean, come on, just with yelling about the how can this offense think to a little quarterback would overthrow a 6'6" tight end by 7 yards. You're like, what are you gonna? I mean, so yeah, but I think you're absolutely right. Kirk Shiraka will be that guy. Brian, do you agree, or is there another? You have a dark horse candidate for us to blame?
Obvious answer is Kirk Raka. He has his quarterback, his guy that he brought to Minnesota and how was brought to Rutgers. So there's no really excuse there that he inherited a quarterback that can't throw a 3-yard pass. So if I think Alec Manis does not have a great season, part of the blame is on Ethan, but I think a lot of the blame would be on Shiraka for not being able to get the most out of him. And I think we all agree that this Rutgers team, if it does not have a great season, is much more likely going to be because of the offense and not the defense. Kirk Shiraka got a big raise this year. He's one of the highest paid OCs in the country. So fairly unfairly, if he can't figure it out, he's going to get a lot of blame. So I think the obvious troika here is the offensive coordinator, the quarterback, the head coach. Those three guys get the blame in 99% of the programs. And I think there's no difference here at Rutgers. Things go downhill. Those three guys will be blamed very heavily for that.
All right. We had some criticism. I love this. We had criticism for our hoop grades, for our transfer portal question, basketball. My question revolves around the transfer grades you guys gave Rutgers on the previous episode. From all the metrics I've seen on paper, I thought you guys were going to say A or A minus, but giving a B minus or C plus for the transfer portal haul was shocking. Shocking. Based on everything I've read about these players, it seems like they're going to contribute in a humongous way. All right, let's dive into that. Were we too harsh on the transfer portal? I think my grade was based on the fact that they had two needs and just didn't address one of them. I thought that was kind of obvious. Brian, what do you think? Were we too harsh? Is this transfer portal haul going to be better than we thought?
If Lathan Somerville is as good as people hope, I think we were too harsh. Maybe they saw something we didn't in Somerville and Ogbole, and that's why they didn't get a center, and all this panic is exaggerated. I am of the belief that that is not going to be the case, and I think the lack of a center is going to be very glaring at certain points in the season. So the fact you didn't get a starting center after losing Cliff Maury, to me, automatically deducts you to, at best, a B+, right? I think they obviously addressed the shooting needs with Zach Martini and PJ Hayes. I'm curious about where this reader saw these grades and these numbers, because I don't think Rutgers has a single top 100 transfer in the four they've gotten, and the majority of these guys do not have great rankings in analytical and human rankings. Most of them are unranked on 247 and Rivals and on 3 and ESPN, the people that do these transfer portal rankings. And you take those for what they're worth, right? A lot of guys that were unranked transfers last year ended up playing massive roles for their teams this year. It's not an exact science, but if you're going to cite all the stuff I've read, tells me that Rutgers did a great job, and you're kind of just doing confirmation bias here because you must be looking in every crevice of the internet, because from every major outlet I've looked at, I have not seen this A+ worthy transfer. I just don't. I'm sorry. But you guys can be hopeful that they'll work out. I could totally see a scenario where it does work out, where PJ Hayes and Zach Martini are these snipers that Rutgers needs, where they all kind of play good roles, 15, 20 minutes. Everyone does what they can. In a best case scenario, that could totally happen. But if we're being realistic and looking at this stuff on paper, I think we were totally fair. And maybe you can give them a B instead of a B-. I could concede that. But to think that this transfer class is an A, I think is just ludicrous.
Wow. Firing back at that analysis. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you make a great point though. It's kind of hard to based on any if they got a guy who shot 45% from three. If they got I mean, then maybe you're like, all right, it's going to have to be Steve Peichel's going to have to be proven right for you to be right with your idea that it was an A. All right. Another criticism. This is great. We got people firing. Our last episode did not resonate with the three people who listened to it. Two of them are angry. I thought it was bonkers when you guys were fantasizing about Rutgers making the playoffs this year with an 11-1 or 10-2 record. That would be amazing, but behind my wildest dreams, but there are just too many unknowns for me to think that was a remote possibility. I instead will consider this year the success to check the following boxes: 1, substantial improvements on last year's offensive passing stats, and 2, maintaining the defensive performance we had last year that will give us a couple more wins with a 7-5, 8-4 record. nice to have an upset over an elite team like USC. All right. Well, we didn't really, I mean, we were just answering a question about, well, weren't we? Were we fast? Did I go into like a fugue state there and start talking about us going all the way to the play? I mean, did that? I don't remember. Tell me. It's possible.
We were trying to figure out that we also had the debate about bowl games, and we also missed that, right? The bowls are the playoffs, right? Like the good bowls are the playoffs games, right? So I think we went off the rails a little bit.
Yeah. Right.
But from a fantasizing point, we said exactly what we thought, right? Like this is a dream scenario. I think we laid that out perfectly.
Right. Yeah.
It's June. It's June. This is what we talk about in June. What do you want to talk about in June? The tackle rotation? It's June. Second of all, that's the high-end fantasy dream season that, in theory, is possible because the schedule is accessible. But we're not saying it's going to happen. I mean, can you imagine going into November and Rutgers is 8-0? That'd be, I mean, that's like what, a 1% chance of that happening? It's possible, and it's worth talking about. It's June. So would Rutgers being undefeated in November be bonkers? Yeah, it would be bonkers. We're just talking about it. We're not saying it's going to happen.
The crazy part is they don't have, like, if you ranked the Big Ten preseason, Rutgers doesn't play the 4 best teams in the conference. So how many teams is the Big Ten going to get into the playoff? That's the other crazy part.
It's going to be Stephen A. Smith screaming about this on First Take or whatever the hell the show's called now, going, "Hey, Rutgers hasn't played anybody." That's going to be the new. That's going to be it. Yeah, this is going to be the narrative when they're 8-0. And I'm not backing down from it. I don't know what I said in the last podcast. I don't listen to the show. If I was in a fugue state and said they were going to go 11-1, I'm standing behind it. I'll have to go back. Tell me if that was the case. I mean, marijuana is legal in New Jersey now. Don't judge me. All right. That's all I got on that. Yeah, I think that's all the questions we have looking through this. This has been one of our odder shows. Perfect for June 4th. What else we got? Anything?
How'd you feel about the moving the season opener from Saturday to Thursday of Labor Day weekend, a 6 p.m. kickoff against Howard? I
love it. I'm all for it because I have kids and my daughter's soccer schedule on Saturday. This affords me the opportunity to see my by the way, 2 goals, Sarah, my daughter, 2 goals against Hotspur of Ramsey, New Jersey, in a 4-1 victory. Banged it in.
Spurs.
Grinding goal. Came up, chased the goaltender, let one go, banged it in, then a pretty feed. Yeah, scoring machine.
You better tell Mike O'Neill in your 2 p.m.
I don't. You don't think I'd mention this? Absolutely. That my daughter's starring for Montclair's B team. Mention this all the time. He was down in North Carolina recruiting. I'm going to tell him he's gone too far. He's right here up the New Jersey Turnpike.
That's it.
Yeah, there you go. But Watt Mag, we didn't talk about him to BYU. You want to mention that, Brian? Surprised?
No, I'm not surprised he went to the West Coast. There's been some talk that he was him and his group were a bit difficult to deal with for a lot of other teams. Troy Donovan kind of hinted at that. I don't know the intimate details, but what I do know is this: he ended up at a good program in the best league in the sport. BYU is a good basketball program, and I think it's a good spot for him. He gets to go back to the West Coast. I feel bad for him that he has to live in Utah, but that's kind of just the deal you make with that.
Totally agree with you. I mean, and you don't know. I mean, again, we don't know what NIL dollars are getting thrown around from that team. Like we have a sense that SEC teams are dominating this. I don't know that that's the case. Like I really don't know. You know, it's quite possible he got a decent pay that they have some money to spend on basketball out there. It is a big deal for them. So
I do know that San Diego State felt like they had a really good chance of landing him, and then he ended up at BYU. So I don't know. Those 2 schools are more basketball schools than football schools. I'd imagine they each have good NIL coin, but with this stuff, it's not even worth guessing because who knows. To move on from this topic, I think to wrap on what you mentioned earlier, looking forward to 24-25, we obviously don't have to do a whole big preview, but I guess we can predict all the categories we talked about today about this past year. Like, who do you guys think is going to be the team of the year? I think I know the answer. I think y'all know the answer. Who's going to be the team of the year next season?
Oh boy, here we go. Pat, you want to go first?
Just setting up this ultimate crash, Brian. Just setting it up, teeing it up in June. Yeah, I don't want to say the obvious. I'll let you take that one. I listen, I follow wrestling very closely. I think they're set up really well for a nice season. But go ahead, talk about basketball.
I think it might be. I'm going to disagree. I think it might be. I mean, right? If you again, this is the conversation we've had. I think it might be the football team. Certainly, there's going to be more attention on the basketball team, but there is a chance that the team we're in the same spot this time next June 4th when we're discussing the recap of this season. If Rutgers goes to a really good, gets to 9-3, goes to a really good bowl, that to me is going to trump if the basketball gets in the NCAA tournament, does not win a game, certainly that would trump that. If basketball gets into the NCAA tournament and wins one game, 9-3 in a bowl game might trump that for me. Good bowl. Sweet 16 probably would trump 9-3 good bowl. What do you think, Brian? Give me your answer to that question.
I would say if Rutgers men's basketball is not the team of the year next season, it would be a massive disappointment, barring a Rutgers football run to the college football playoff. If they do that, I think it would be pretty hard for any other team to overtake that. Obviously, we don't think that's very likely. So I think, to me, a successful season would be a run to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. That, to me, is the minimum for a successful season next year, barring, obviously, injury or other things that are out of their control. It has to be Rutgers basketball for them to have a successful season. And obviously, there's other teams with a chance. Field hockey could always have a big year and win a Big Ten title, or women's soccer could always break through and win a tournament. But to me, all the pieces are there for men's basketball to be the team of the year and possibly be one of the greatest teams in school history. So if they're not, I think we'll be having a very interesting conversation in 8 months. But if to answer your question before, 9-3 in a good bowl game, or a run to the Sweet 16, I think you take a run to the Sweet 16 every single time.
Break the tie on that because I strongly disagree.
Really,
This football program, 9-3 in the Big Ten, that means you beat Washington or USC. This is still, I don't know, this is still, people hate when you say it. We love the basketball team, but holy crap, fan base would be head over heels for that. 9-3, and you're January 1st in this. Give me a bowl. I don't know. What is it? The Citrus Bowl, Outback Bowl, or something? I don't know.
You wouldn't be in a New York Six Bowl at 9-3.
You'd be in a good bowl.
Not
you
a
wouldn't
New
be in
York
the
Six Bowl.
Pinstripe Bowl. Where would you be?
Maybe Music City Bowl, right? That's one we talked about a lot.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. So you beat somebody. You had to beat somebody to do that.
Right. I still think Sweet 16 is way better than 9.
You still think that's better than that?
I do too. Yeah. Let
me do the math here. The number of teams that go to the Sweet 16 every year. Hang on. Let me give you a sec. 16.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, 16, you're basically in the running for a national championship. If you're playing in a good bowl game at 9, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's exactly equal, because if you're the 16th best team in football, you're probably just on the cusp of the playoff, right? Which is what Rutgers would probably be. So I don't know.
Here's a piece of trivia for you. Ready? See if you can answer this one. This one is from a friend of the pod. I won't say which friend. What year? The last time Rutgers had an over 500 football team and went to a bowl in the same year that the men's basketball team went to the NCAA tournament. Can you give me that year, the last time that happened?
The one time it happened, 1976, the Garden State Bowl, and Rutgers to the Final Four, no?
No, that's not the...
That would be too easy.
Right.
Wait, and Rutgers made the NCAA tournament, you said, right?
Right. Okay.
Rutgers made one bowl game before 2005, and it was the Garden State Bowl.
Right.
So to be
yes. The answer to that question, 1978, 1979. Garden State Bowl, NCAA tournament. Been a long time. Been a minute.
So I was right. I got the year wrong. Let me ask you this. Name me the last 4 winners of the Music City Bowl. Name me the last 4 participants in the Music City Bowl.
You're just misunderstanding.
I'm just misunderstanding that.
You're misunderstanding how big of a deal it would be for this football team, where it's been the passion about it to be 9-3. It'd be a huge deal.
I understand.
That would be the second best season in half a century-ish. It'd be a big deal. Huge deal. The way this program's been, to be relevant, to be ranked, probably be ranked at that point or close to it. You'd be in the conversation. People would be talking about Rutgers football. Enormous.
I just can't compute how you're arguing being a fringe top 25 team, playing a bowl game that in today's environment is even more meaningless than it's ever been. Bowl games have always been meaningless, and it's never been more meaningless now. To do that versus being in the top 16 teams in basketball as one of the most hyped teams in the country with 2 5-star freshmen. Potentially, I don't know if it's happened, but potentially in Newark, a Sweet 16 game in Newark as Rutgers basketball. When Steve Pikiell was hired, we would joke that if he made the NCAA tournament, they would build him a statue outside the rack. And he's making the Sweet 16 with 2 NBA players. The entire nation would be writing about it. And you're telling me the Music City Bowl is more important than that? How? Pat, please.
You guys make very compelling arguments, but I'm going to go Brian on this one. Sorry, Steve. I think he's right.
It just haven't been around long enough. Could be an upset. So you beat Washington, you beat USC, you're playing relevant football, you beat Maryland. Look, hey, I get it. Sometimes we make an argument here just for the sake of discussion. But I will say this, that people would be fired up for that 9-3 team. So what is it? The basketball team, I guess, what's the question? Are you guys going to be 7th in the Big Ten and then get there? You're going to be 1st in the Big Ten and go to the Sweet 16? All right, well, that's a different deal. I guess we don't have all the information. I don't have all the information about what the basketball team's record is. Are they seeded 3rd in the NCAA tournament, make the Sweet 16? Is it a huge... That lots of questions there. They sneaking in as an 8 seed? They beating somebody? I don't know.
It's June, Steve. We're just talking to talk. Just fill in the airwaves. Now, I would say if you win the Big Ten regular season or the Big Ten tournament, even that would be more.
That would be bigger. If you win the Big Ten tournament, that would be bigger than the season I described. Absolutely.
What would you sign up for then? Winning a Big Ten tournament or reaching a Sweet 16?
Winning the Big Ten. Ooh, that's tough, man. Woo. Sweet 16, I think. Man.
I agree.
No, I don't know. That's tricky. I could go either way on that one. Winning the Big Ten tournament or the Music City Bowl? Get the Music City Bowl from anyone. Give me a better bowl than that. Can I get a better bowl than that 9-3?
You want the Las Vegas Bowl?
No, I don't want that. Big Ten Bowl tie-ins.
Now, if you said 10-2 and making an Orange Bowl or something to that effect, then, or a Rose Bowl, now that's a tough decision for me. Making a Rose Bowl versus making the Sweet 16, that's a difficult decision.
That's not a tough decision. That is the obvious. The Rose Bowl by a millionfold. By a million. Don't give me that face. Are you out of your mind? By a millionfold. Not even close. Rutgers Rose Bowl. You're just a college basketball sycophant. You're nuts. You're crazy. That's it.
You're nuts. You're nuts.
You're nuts. You're absolutely nuts.
Also, right?
Come on.
We are saying that if you make the Rose Bowl, you're in the college football playoff, right? That is infinitely more impressive.
No, I don't know if it's true. Like, if you make the Rose Bowl, is the Rose Bowl part of the playoff still?
Right. Yeah. Like the Rose Bowl was the college football playoff semifinal last year.
Right. But
so I'm assuming that still in this new structure, it will still be one of the premier rounds, even, right? Probably semis again.
It's possible. We'll have to look that up. I guess I was speaking in a hypothetical world where the Rose Bowl was just still the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl used to be you have to win the Big Ten title and you're contending for a national championship to make it. Now you're just the 3rd best Big Ten team, or at least in the 14 playoff era, that's what it was. We're going way off the
Rose Bowl is a quarterfinal game. Just looking it up.
Okay,
so you'd be in the quarterfinal of the playoffs.
Then excuse my argument. I'm trying to think of a bowl game that's not in the playoff that would be prestigious. Right. But we are so off the rails that please, I'm begging you to end the episode.
You're going to have to do some editing here. This is why I script this thing, just in case you ever wondered, why does Politi spend all this time scripting the podcast? All right. On that note, let's wrap it up. Look forward to seeing how Brian Fonseca edits this and tries to make it into a good June listen as you're driving to the Jersey Shore. If you run into any football recruits, text us and let us know. I don't know when we'll do our next episode, but signing off until then, thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Rutgers Rant. To participate in the conversation and receive live updates about the Scarlet Knights directly to your phone, sign up at NJ.com/insider.